Great, ladies and gentlemen, another big hand. And I just want to say, Floyd and Stephanie, who have put this Martha's Vineyard African American Film Festival together, 19 years now, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give it up for them. This is, and as Stephanie shared with me this morning, it's Academy accredited, and there was some 300, or was it 650 films submitted. Ultimately, about 70 were selected. So that is really, really powerful, but incredible. Give it up for them again. And let's give it up for this brother one more time. Now, you got Dick Gregory. I mean, that's the real Dick Gregory. And I will say Dick Gregory was a friend and a mentor of mine. I'll forever be indebted to his powerful legacy. He spent 3 weeks with me in New Orleans in 1994 when I was a 35-year-old candidate for mayor, campaigning in the community to help me win that election, and he did it. And I'll forever be indebted with him. And I spent many times with Dick Gregory hearing about the Russians and the Chinese and a lot of incredible stories. But let me ask you this, because, you know, what inspired this documentary? I mean, what inspired the focus on Dick Gregory for you?
Well, first of all, thank you. You know, what inspired me about Dick Gregory really was kind of a path to discovery. I mean, when I grew up in the 80s. I was a kid of the 80s. First time I heard of Dick Gregory was as a drink. You know, it was, give me some Dick Gregory. That's what people used to say. Yeah. And so I didn't know him as a comedian, really. I mean, I didn't know him as a comedian until many, many years later. He wasn't the contemporary comedian of the 80s. You know, we all know about The Cosby Show, and Richard Pryor was in a bunch of movies, and Eddie Murphy was in a bunch of movies. And Dick Gregory was not that comedian, the contemporary comedian to me, but it was many years later when I was actually in film school, first of all, that I had discovered him looking at the work of Cosby and Pryor. I had done a thesis film. Wow. And then I looked at their work, and I was like, their work is kind of the same as each other. One's just kind of raunchy, the other one's sort of clean, back then at least. And then I looked at Dick Gregory, and I was like, they sort of stole all their stuff from this guy. And I looked at his style and his mannerisms and the timing and all that stuff, and I said, man, this is like the godfather of contemporary black comedy. And it wasn't, you know, fast forward to when President Obama ran and he was on that State of the Black Union, and there was so many. I mean, Lena Waithe, she mentioned it when she was in the interviewing for the film and when she came on to executive produce the film. And if you talk to a lot of comedians, they look at that performance of the State of the Black Union on a panel, of which I think you were on that panel that day, and they consider it one of the best comedy routines of all time, of what he was able to do up on that panel. And I just fell in love with him, you know, once I saw that, and I said, I've got to make a movie about this guy. And I called him, I cold called him. I didn't have any relationship to Dick Gregory. I didn't know him at all. And there's a lot of relationships in my business that I've formed that way. Just pick up the phone and cold call somebody, and, you know, they haven't hung up the phone in my face yet. I thought he was going to, but he didn't. And he said, yeah, I'd be, you know, I'm interested in doing this. And I flew him out to LA, and the rest is history.
What'd you discover was, how would you describe the triggering event that made him go from being a comedian to a civil rights activist? I mean, most civil rights activists were, grew up in the church, grew up in activism, some were lawyers, but very few were entertainers. And there was a comment in there where he was not just a comedian who showed up at one march and then went back to his quote-unquote day job. What did you discover was a triggering event? Because he became a lifelong activist, not just a temporary activist, not just someone who did it here and there.
Yeah, I mean, he full-on abandoned his entertainment career.
Yeah.
And it was an odd thing because when I first talked to him, he would kind of talk down about entertainers. And it's like, why are you saying this? Like, you're an entertainer. I don't understand what you mean by that. He's like, I don't hang out with entertainers. I don't, entertainers don't change the world. Athletes don't change the world. Activists change the world. And he said something to me, he said, there's a street in St. Louis where he's from named Dick Gregory. Mm-hmm. And he said it intersects with Martin Luther King Boulevard. And he said, that's the story of my life. When Dr. King ran into Dick Gregory, that's what changed my whole life. And that's what he gave his life to, was to become an activist and understand that. And he said he couldn't do it part-time. He said, I have to do this. I have to give 150% of myself in order to do this. And that's what inspired him to do it.
So many great people, so many people who contribute have the ups and downs. And I thought you captured, but also, the tragedy of his financial challenges that came. Did he have a perspective on that he shared that you?
Oh yeah, he didn't care. That was his perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't care. He didn't care about money the way the rest of us do, at all. He understood it. He made money. And he went broke 3 times in his life, he said. After he left comedy, after he lost the Bahamian Diet, and the 3rd time, which was odd, was when Barack Obama got elected president. And the reason why is because for years, corporate interests like GM, Ford, all these places would call Dick Gregory to be a motivational speaker for their black unions to help rile them up. And when President Obama got elected, they said, well, what do we need to pay you for anymore? Just turn on the television. There you see your black inspiration right there.
So all of his paid
So that
gigs
lecture income kind of dried up. And so he said, to hell, I'm just going to go back to comedy. And that's what he ended up doing. But after the Bahamian Diet, he said, I never want to be rich like that again.
Wow.
Ever again.
Was there a sense that he was taken advantage of by his business partners?
Yeah, he was not as his publicist Steve Jaffe said, he wasn't a great businessman. He was a fantastic comedian, entertainer, but he wasn't a great businessman. But not in the sense that we normally hear. Because when you hear these stories about comedians and musicians and entertainers, you normally hear they squandered their money on
Lifestyle.
women,
Lifestyle.
gambling and drugs and all this type of stuff. He was squandering it on liberation.
Yeah, right.
On freedom. He was giving the money away to help people. And there's a lot of stories of people after these types of screenings and when it premiered initially on Showtime, of folks reaching out to me just on social media saying, Dick Gregory paid for my college tuition.
Isn't that amazing?
He paid for me to go to medical school.
Quietly, without publicity, he did it.
And no publicity at all.
Yeah.
That's just the generosity of his heart and the importance he understood of money, but not for himself.
So I was fascinated that you found a lot of incredible video content from many years ago, from recently. I think for the audience, what's the challenge when you take a historic figure like that and you've got to reconstruct 60 years of their existence? Where do you find this material? How do you get this material?
Well, it took 6 years. Getty's, one of the sponsors. We got a lot of it from them, actually. But it takes a team. It was a process. We started it 6 years ago. I don't want to misrepresent that we worked on it for a solid 6 years, but definitely for a solid 3 years, I would say that we worked on the film. And I had a fantastic archival producer. I had a fantastic producing team. And, sometimes you find these things and eventually you just have to abandon it because you
can't pull it together.
You can't pull everything together. We now have the largest consolidated archive of Dick Gregory in the world. It's, nearly 10,000 hours of content, of which we're in talks with the Smithsonian about actually donating to them. Yeah, to include in their collection. And the thing is, though, that my favorite piece in the film was something we got totally last minute, and that was the picture of him on stage making Dr. King laugh.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and that showed up at the very last minute, and I said, we gotta stop.
You know,
and
Dick can
get
make you
this in the
laugh.
movie.
I mean, I saw Dick speak on many occasions, and he would, you know, he would control the audience initially with humor, and then he would switch gears and get dead serious, and then he'd, you know, get in your face and tell you about yourself or tell the audience about itself. It was a really, really incredible and talented man who contributed so much. Let's give it up for Dick Gregory, right? Dick Gregory. I want to talk a little bit about you before we have to adjourn this evening. Your journey as a filmmaker. What inspired your journey as a filmmaker? What is it, and who is it, and how'd you get to where you are?
Yeah, well, I actually went initially to Northwestern University as an undergrad. I have some of my friends here, as you can see.
Chicago.
And then, you know, funny story is I was actually headed to medical school. Had some doctors in my family, and saying, okay, I'll just go do that. But it was my grandmother, who was in the medical field, who said to me, you know, you need to get a degree in something you can actually get a job in, like instead of chemistry. Like nobody hires people with chemistry degrees. And so I ended up getting a journalism degree, where a lot of documentary storytelling is somewhat similar, and went to NYU Film School, went to New York University, and it was at the same time that I got into that school was the year that my deferment to Harvard Medical School ran out. And so then I had an excuse to tell my parents, like, this is where
I'm not going to Harvard.
I'm not going to Harvard Medical School. I'm gonna go here. And so for years had produced animation and visual effects, and then started financing films, which is you know, few and far between film investors and the you know, black or brown film investors, and you know, financed a lot of great movies. Financed Bill Nye's Science Guy, financed one of Spike Lee's movies, The Sweet Blood of Jesus, co-financed the remake of Children of the Corn, the Stephen King film. And for me, when it came to the story of Dick Gregory, the realization was that it's important for us to be able to tell our own stories. And that really had not been the case, you know, I would say as short as maybe 5 years ago. And then it really accelerated after last year, after George Floyd's death and after the movement and protests and things like this. And two major filmmakers reached out to me when we announced this project and told me that they had worked for years to try to make a film about Dick Gregory. And they were just waiting for me to show up. And so they said the problem they had, we weren't able to get funding, and I said, well, we'll just finance it ourselves. And that's exactly what we did. And because of that, we were able to have full control over this story, and Showtime came along and said, we love this thing, we want to tell this
All
story.
right, that's great news. What's the future, the present and the future for black filmmakers? Because as you said, the landscape is moving, it's adjusting, it's changing. One of our concerns is always whether that's temporary or fleeting, momentarily, because people respond and then they go back to the old normal. What's your sense? How do you feel? What's the future?
I mean, it's typical that what you describe, it's sort of every 5 years kind of goes like this. Like suddenly we got to hire a whole bunch of black people, and then they kind of forget about it, and then you go back to doing it again. This time, I think, is different. I mean, Dick Gregory used to joke that Riot season was between June and August of every year. But this Riot season in 2020 was a lot different. It was an entirely different thing. I mean, 2015, when we first started filming Dick Gregory, looked a lot like 2020. There was a lot of Black Death happening. I mean, it was about a year removed from Mike Brown, a year removed from Eric Garner, a couple of years from Trayvon Martin. The difference of last year, though, was the pandemic. We were all at home, and we were forced to pay attention to these things and pay attention to these stories. And now, all of a sudden, I get, calls left and right looking for black writers, looking for black producers. Oh, we need a black female to head up this cause, or, or this role or this position. And so I think it's different this time. I'm optimistic about it being different.
You will say to young people that filmmaking and journalism and communications is a field that leads to jobs that pay.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think it feels a lot different this time. I would expect it to have only been able to sustain itself for a couple of months, but we're a year now removed from the summer of last year, and it's still really going. And Dick Gregory would often say, like, listen, there's a lot of things that haven't changed since I was marching in the 60s, but he would be remiss, he said, to not acknowledge the progress that has occurred. And he often talked about that because he said it would be a disservice to the folks that risked their lives in order for us to be able to be sitting here and talking.
I had shared this with you earlier, that in 2014, I believe, we co-sponsored with Reverend Al Sharpton and a number of others a march in Washington after I think the murder of Michael Brown. It may have been 14 or early 15. It was, and Dick Gregory was there, and was participating in the march. And so, pre-march, I had Dick said, Dick, come talk to some of the young people who are participating in this march. And I asked him in front of him, said, Dick, what's different now than 50 years ago? He said, man, y'all out here taking selfies. Y'all look like y'all having a good damn time. He said, and y'all got the police protecting you? And y'all got a goddamn permit. He said, when we were marching, we didn't know if the Klan or the police were going to beat us up first. He says, look, this is a serious issue, but it's different. I mean, the way this march is being conducted is different. We were paranoid when we were marching. We didn't know if it was considered to be inherently dangerous to march. I mean, Dick had a way of, putting things into incredible perspective, and we'll always treasure him. But, what's next for you?
Some rest. take a little time off.
I mean, any projects on the board you want us to kind of be looking out for?
Yeah, there's a couple of projects I can finally start to talk about a little bit. We're I think I shared with you we're going to tell the story really at last of about Secretary Ron Brown, of Secretary of Commerce, this was one of these stories. I remember I was in, I think I had just entered high school, mid-90s. And it always stuck with me. And I kind of got reignited from Dick Gregory, because Dick Gregory had a wealth of material, autopsy photos, and just all types of stuff that he was talking to me about. And I said, there's a lot of unanswered questions about a man who was going to be the first black president, who was on that trajectory. And again, this is an opportunity for us to tell our own stories before someone else does. And so I look forward to,
we'll look forward to that. Ron Brown was an incredible, incredible man. In fact, he started his career as a staffer at the National Urban League. In fact, became the leader of the National Urban League's Washington Bureau in the 1970s, and got observed by Ted Kennedy because of his numerous visits to testify before committees in the U.S. Senate. And Kennedy saw him and tapped him, and he became a Kennedy staffer in Kennedy's 1980 campaign for president, which launched his involvement of ultimately becoming chair of the DNC and Secretary of Commerce. I will look forward to that because of just an incredible, great black man, a great American, and a contributor. Let's give it up for Brother Gaines. Let's give it up for Andre Gaines for incredible work. And I want to thank all of you all for coming out tonight. I want to thank all the sponsors. I want to thank the National Urban League team, for being a part of this. And the Martha's Vineyard African American Film Festival is really a jewel, ladies and gentlemen, a real jewel, a real special institution that now for 19 years has given black filmmakers and black featured and directors and executive producers an opportunity to showcase their work. And I just think it's so, so important. So spread the word about the Dick Gregory film and spread the word about Andre Gaines. You're going to be hearing his name a lot of times once again in the future. So any announcements before
the film is available on Showtime, and you can also get it, I think, now on Hulu and Amazon Prime. Just
okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. We really, really appreciate you. And the Martha's Vineyard, the festival continues through
Saturday.
Through Saturday. Okay.
We got Rick James tomorrow night.
Uh-oh. You got some music?
He'll be, well, he
And
won't be
after
here.
party?
He won't be here, but he got some music in the dock.
All right. Fantastic. Okay.
That's it.
Thank you all, ladies and
Thank
gentlemen.
you so
guys.
much. Thank you.
Have a good night.